Hello everyone, I am Nathan P. Butler. Welcome to my Star Wars and Other Things vlog, the voice of reason, or lack thereof. You might know me as the guy behind a Saga on Home Video, a fan's guide to U.S. Star Wars home video releases, or other things, either on the YouTube channel, podcasts, the Star Wars Timeline Gold, or otherwise. This episode, though, is focused not on me, but on you. You ask the questions, I provide the answers. We've seen this before here on the vlog, and on the last time we did a Your Questions Answered episode, I said, hey, you got more questions? Stick them in the comments. You did. So now we're going to take a look at your questions and answer as many as possible in this episode. Keep in mind, by the way, that when the Patreon launches in October, the highest of the 3 tiers will allow access to a Patreon-exclusive Q&A that will be guaranteed monthly, rather than being just whenever there's enough questions or whenever I have the time to put one together like these regular YouTube ones are. So a chance for you to not have to compete with others to get your questions answered and just jump straight on in there. But here, regular episode of Q&A here for the vlog. So let's see what you have asked since that last Q&A. Samstar2 asks several questions here, 5 of them. Wow. We have, number 1. Is it possible for you to do videos on other things, and what would they be? From a time standpoint, I don't think it would be possible just because, aside from all this stuff that I'm doing, of course, I do have my job teaching online, lots of meetings involved with that, and a lot of times I'm creating content for my students. Like, I think that in Edgenuity, which is our platform, which is a great platform, our LMS, our learning management software, it does a great job of most of the economic topics. When it comes to supply and demand, it uses some technical terms that can kind of cause students to be a little weary of it, a little wary of it, and it sometimes can get confusing. So I basically took the way that my professor in college for Economics 101 and 102, the guy that I was a supplemental instructor for years later, I basically went through and used his method of explaining it. Basically, a supply and demand is just human behavior that's natural. We just happen to put numbers and graphs to it. And I explained it to him in a video I put together for them on, I believe it was Camtasia. So from time to time, I'm supplementing what I'm doing with my students with stuff like I do here. Which is great, but it's also time-consuming. So I don't know that I would jump into other topics too much. You will see already on this channel those stuff like my Nate's Favorite Deck Building Game series, which is taking a look at different games like Star Realms and Ascension, the DC deck building game with episodes that will be coming out soon, things like that. And, of course, I do those live streams of not just Star Wars topics like Battlefront when I do the regular live streams, but I also do VR live streams through PlayStation VR for new PlayStation VR releases that I'm checking out. So there is some new stuff here on the channel, but Star Wars tends to be the focus because that tends to be mainly what I'm interested in, but also the fact that we got a lot of people who are interested in this channel and the podcast and everything else because of the Star Wars content. So, yes, it's possible. I won't see a lot of it, but I'm already doing a little bit, and those will continue. Maybe you'll see something else every once in a while. Number 2, if you get a chance to make a cameo appearance in a Star Wars movie, what would you want to play as? Let's see. I would say, just something kind of cool, like could be a bounty hunter, could be just a background character being goofy. Really being in any Star Wars film would be awesome, but I'd like it to be something where either I'm seen as myself, or it's something that's memorable, and somehow you can maybe recognize my voice inside the suit or something, you know, like, I want to be able to say, hey, look, it's me, and have people not say, really, you're full of crap, you know what I mean? It's funny you mentioned that, though, because I'm actually going to get a chance to have a cameo in something by a Star Wars creative team. The creative team of John Ostrander and Jan Duursema, who we know from Dawn of the Jedi and Star Wars Legacy, my favorite Star Wars comic series ever, they are working on a new graphic novel that's coming called Hexer Dusk. And part of this big Kickstarter process they had was they had this really high-tier level that you could pledge with, where not only would you get all this cool stuff, but you'd also get to have an appearance as a background character based on your likeness in the book. So I'm going to be able to appear as that character, whoever it is, in the background somewhere within Hexer Dusk, which would be kind of cool. This is, of course, aside from the other cameo that I actually had, I guess I should say maybe I should want to be the character that I did have a cameo as. There's a Tuckerism, a character named after me in the pages of Star Wars Empire, in the issue called What's Sin Loyalty, Jeremy Barlow's first Star Wars comic, where he has a character who's like this Imperial who's betrayed the Empire, that's stopped by the Stormtrooper and everything as the Death Star battle is going on. And in the script, the character's name is Chrono Relt, Relt being the last 4 letters of Butler backwards on purpose, and then Chrono with a K as a reference to my Chrono Radio, which was my first podcast, and actually how you can get to the YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Chrono Radio. So maybe I should say I should be him, but that would require yet another version of A New Hope, and do we really need another one of those? Let's see. He prefaces the next one with, if you don't know what Power Rangers is, look it up first. If I don't know what Power Rangers is, if I could slap through a camera. Anyway, let's see. Power Rangers. At one point, Disney owned the rights to Power Rangers. If they still did, would you want the franchise to cross over with Marvel characters? Wow, it's kind of off topic for Star Wars, but this doesn't have to be Star Wars stuff, so it makes perfect sense here. Good thing it's the vlog. I mean, probably not. You know, and I was someone who watched the original Power Rangers as a kid. Watched the original Power Rangers and watched, you know, VR Troopers and that sort of thing. All these things where they took the Japanese shows and kind of butchered them and changed them to make them American shows and that sort of thing. I watched the original Power Rangers up through, at least through the White Ranger stuff, where Green Ranger became White Ranger, and through the first Power Rangers movie. I actually still love the really heavy rock, well, heavier rock version of the Power Rangers theme from that first movie. But I've actually just gotten back into it. I love the darker fan film made of it, with Katie Sackhoff and others, which is an unofficial thing. But then when they recently did that reboot with the new film and the new cast and everything, I've actually really liked that. I thought it was a much better film than I expected it to be. So I'm digging it, and I've got it. It's one of the first movies I bought in 4K for the new 4K television we've got. Playing those on the Xbox One S, which does play 4K discs, unfortunately, unlike the PS4 Pro, which won't play 4K discs, but will produce in 4K, which is my primary gaming system in there. But his question, would I want to see him cross over with Marvel? Not really. I'm not a big fan of universes crossing over with universes when they just aren't necessarily super compatible, you know? Like a Transformers and G.I. Joe was always a stretch to me, but they felt like they kind of could work together. And then you really couldn't get away from it in the Marvel comics when you got to the Transformers Generation 2 stuff, because they kicked it off in the pages of G.I. Joe. Kind of going back to the 80s and stuff here. But, I don't know, relative to Marvel and Power Rangers, I mean, I guess it's not as bad a fit as some things. Like, hey, let's have Star Trek and Green Lantern. What? That kind of stuff. But, I don't know, if they do, it needs to be something that either is completely separate, stupid, and just let them do it, and then nobody bothers to ever reference it again, like most crossovers wind up being, like X-Men and Star Trek The Next Generation, or make it something that winds up mattering to the point where we're like, holy crap, I guess that did matter, like they did with whoever's got the license now for the Masters of the Universe comics. They did a thing where they crossed over with DC, and that wound up being a huge deal, because it wound up bringing, I believe it was He-Man's mom back into the picture or something. So there are some chances to do something cool with it, but I don't know, it sounds like a train wreck to me. Number 4, Star Wars X crossed with Star Trek, the movie. Should it happen? No! God, no. Two vastly different franchises. The fact that they got Star in their name and are huge and started in either the 60s or 70s always make people make these the ones that get compared. But no, the technologies don't make sense in relation to each other. The philosophies of it, the storytelling style, the approach to it. Now, granted, I would say it'd be easier to do that if you were to cross it over with the newer Star Trek, because as I said, with the Star Trek reboot film that preceded Into Darkness, it was the Star Trek film that Star Wars fans had been waiting for, because it was basically told more in a Star Wars style than a Star Trek style that's more deliberative, deep thought, bigger ideas, less action, etc., etc. I'm actually in the rewatch of Next Generation now, which I guess feeds into my next question, or the next person asking questions here. But maybe with the newer stuff, but even then I don't, no, God, leave that to fan films, please. Please leave it to fan films. We don't want to see that on the big screen. Those who want to see it are going to be like, yeah, it's going to be so awesome. They're going to see it on the big screen, and it's going to be a bigger train wreck than Marvel crossed with Power Rangers. Please leave it to fan fiction. Number 5, have you ever got the chance to see a movie before it came out? Let's see. A movie before it came out. I don't think a movie. Television specials, yes. I got a chance to see Star Wars: The Legacy revealed before it was aired because History Channel's PR department or PR firm sent out screeners of those. So I got to see that before it came out. And like little stuff, like a friend of mine, Chad Peter, was doing a trilogy of films that I think only ever became 2 films. I don't think the third was ever made, and I haven't talked to him in a while. It was going to be called the Sex, Drugs, and Natalie Portman trilogy. It started with the film, it was originally called Sex, Drugs, and Natalie Portman. That just became Sex, although I don't know that he ever released it under that name. Then we had Drugs, which is the second one, starring Shane Alonso, and then you had a third one that was going to be made that I don't think ever got made. But I got a chance to see that early because I actually did some script editing for him on it, so he sent me a copy of it, poster and stuff like that, which was pretty cool at the time. But beyond that, I don't think so. Not really. My wife has had a chance to see some preview early screenings of some films recently, particularly A Cure for Wellness, because she works in a hospital and somebody who she works with was, I guess, maybe making a cameo or something in the movie, and got a chance to get a preview screening down here. But otherwise, not that I can remember, no. Question coming in from Amy Bisson. And Amy, I see your name all the time. Sometime you're going to have to tell me exactly how that's pronounced if I'm saying it correctly. But Amy says, or asks, are you a Star Trek fan? Are there other science fiction universes you're a fan of, whether written, like the Honorverse, Foundation, Dune, Vorkosigan, never heard of that one, or media, Battlestar Classic, Battlestar Reboot, Babylon 5, The Expanse, etc.? And do you have any opinions of Game of Thrones or any other epic fantasies being converted to television series? Wow. So am I a Star Trek fan? Yes. I was a big Star Trek fan really from around the time of, I guess, the 5th season or late 4th season of Star Trek The Next Generation up until about the middle of Voyager. So I followed all the series between then, went back and watched all the old stuff at the time, with the exception of the animated series that you couldn't see at the time. There wasn't just a way to see it whenever I was watching everything. And then I kind of slacked off because Voyager wasn't holding my attention, and I had become by then a big fan of Babylon 5. Babylon 5 is one of my favorite sci-fi franchises ever, and after learning more about what Paramount did in the creation process of Deep Space Nine that utterly ripped off the pilot script that was being shopped, the pilot script and sort of Bible of the series is being shopped around to Paramount, among others, by J. Michael Straczynski in trying to get funding for Babylon 5, I was so pissed off and sick of it, I said, screw it to Deep Space Nine. And I probably shouldn't have, because I probably would have enjoyed the end of it. So actually, right now, months ago, I started a huge Trek rewatch. Watched all of Enterprise, all the original series in chronological order, as best as we can tell by the Star Wars chronology book. All the animated series, God, that was difficult. You think watching Clone Wars all the way through sometimes is bad. Try watching Star Trek the animated series, though it's blessedly shorter. Then I watched all of, I watched all the original crew films. And now I'm watching Next Generation. Actually, today, the most recent episode I finished before I started recording in these videos today was a Conundrum in Season 5. So I'm going to wrap that up and start crossing it over as I do with Deep Space Nine in chronological order, and eventually reach the end of the franchise, go back, loop around, and watch the reboot films. And I will be watching Discovery and paying for frickin' CBS All Access for now. And hey, as a Star Trek fan, I am going to be watching something that seems to have the spirit of more optimism like the original Star Trek did, which is not a Star Trek series like Discovery, but the Orville. So, yeah. Let's see. Other sci-fi universes I'm a fan of. I was a big fan of the Stargate SG-1 continuity. I say SG-1 because it does branch off from the film. The film did have its own sequels as novels. But Stargate was a big thing for me for a while. Expanse absolutely is. I love the books. The TV series is doing a really good job of adapting it, but it's slow because it's only X number of episodes per season, and the seasons are spread out, so it's going to take a while for them to ever catch up. Love Farscape. Farscape is phenomenal. Babylon 5, amazing. So yeah, there's quite a few that I really enjoy. And my wife and I watch stuff like the Arrowverse shows and all the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff. It's just I don't do videos and stuff about it because they're not my areas of expertise. But yeah, I love them. I'm a big fan of sci-fi stuff. Actually, just yesterday was absolutely stoked to finally get to see, because it took about a week for me to actually get a copy, the 4K restored version of the Blade Runner Final Cut. Absolutely gorgeous. Great sound mix, gorgeous in 4K. As for books, sci-fi stuff, probably more stuff like The Expanse and whatnot, the old Robotech stuff. Right now I'm rereading the Dresden Files, all that stuff. I'm much more, and with the exception of something like a Codex Alera or Saga of Seven Sons, I'm much more into the sci-fi than the fantasy stuff when it comes to the sci-fi reading that I do. Do you have any opinions of Game of Thrones or any other epic fantasies being converted to TV series? I think Game of Thrones was done quite well in the conversion process, though of course it does lose certain small nuances. I love the fact that in Season 7, or whatever the new season is, granted it wasn't based on the books because those books haven't been written yet, but the fact that they took out a lot of the, and then they spent 2 episodes walking kind of stuff and just cut that out to make it a more brisk storytelling pace. I thought that was really well done. I actually like the Game of Thrones TV series much more than the books. I've read all the Game of Thrones books, or at least the main series of books, not the spin-off stuff. And the first couple are great, but God, they get ponderous and overburdened and just bloated. You can only hear the same conversation the same number of times or have the same dialogue or narration said over and over again so many times before you feel like you're going insane. It's also why I wasn't a big fan of the Star Wars novel Imperial Commando when they tried to bring Republic Commando into that era. But that's, again, a whole other thing. My thought is that if they do it well and they stay faithful to the original as best as possible, but adapt it for the format that it's in, we could see some fantastic stuff. And thankfully now, we have the type of special effects to make that type of thing viable, not just for movies, but also for television. So pretty stoked to see where they go with more of that type of thing. I am a fan of the Lord of the Rings films, not as much of the Hobbit films because of how much they added and how bloated at times they felt, but fan of that. So, bring it on. The more the merrier when it comes to that type of stuff. The more we can have really, really good, well done, and entertaining sci-fi and fantasy films out there, the more the genre becomes mainstreamed, which is a good thing because it means that the things we like become more popular, there's more stuff for us, there's more conventions for it and whatnot, and less likely to have young people who are interested in those things being called nerds and treated like crap in schools. Fantasy Flicks asks, if Lucas was still in charge, what updates would you like to see? Talking about Star Wars. Also, if you can make your own changes, what updates would you make? If Lucas was still in charge, what updates would I like to see? So to the films, for God's sake, stop tinkering, with the exception of the same things I'd do if I were the one making the changes, which is give us the original versions in high definition or now in 4K if at all possible, based on whatever masters that exist. And as far as individual tinkering with the film, take out some of the stuff that doesn't make any damn sense. Okay, so go back to the Blu-ray version of A New Hope and take the fucking rocks out from in front of R2-D2 because they only appear in one shot. It makes no sense how he got behind them, and when you turn and look at him from behind, the rocks are gone. That's some dumb shit, George. Get rid of it. Stuff like that, right? Just the little stuff that didn't make a lot of sense or was inconsistent, get rid of that. Maybe get rid of the nose, or I would say maybe tweak the nose for Revenge of the Sith and Return of the Jedi. Not sure if I'd say remove them, but it is kind of what he wanted to do, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, just little things like that. But what I think would be interesting is that if Lucas was still in charge, there would be no Episode 7, no Rogue One, and so forth. No new Star Wars films. There may still be more Star Wars on TV, but it probably would have been more Clone Wars instead of moving already on to Rebels. And because of that, it's a whole new ballgame because they would not have had to have rebooted the franchise. The Legends continuity would still just be the official continuity, and we'd still be seeing stories like Sword of the Jedi. Or, something like a continuation of Dawn of the Jedi, or Legacy Volume 2 beyond where they left off. Although we probably have seen more of Brian Wood's Star Wars, which would have sucked. It's kind of like being Canadian, which I'm not, and saying, I'm Canadian, I'm proud of it, but dang, we got Celine Dion, don't we? So, I think that we would have seen a lot more books and comics still in the Legends universe. I'm not sure how long the Legends continuity could have continued growing until there eventually would have been a reboot of some kind, as they were already trying to do with some of the soft rebootish type stuff with some of these accessible stories that don't tie into much of anything or mean much of anything. I'm looking at you, Razor's Edge. But it would have been a whole different ballgame in that regard. So if I were in charge, and I were in charge now in the current situation, I think that it would be 3 things I would set up. And it wouldn't be changes, it'd be rules, changes to the process, right? Number 1, when you're producing Star Wars stories, shove the political correctness and the idea of being political and fitting the social atmosphere Just shove it, get rid of it, it's gone. Okay? Tell a good Star Wars story. Okay? Do not introduce a character just because you want to introduce a character that happens to fit a certain demographic type. If the demographic type you're shoving on that character to put them out there in a story has nothing to do with them as individuals, and it's just there, it's kind of this weird detail, you're like, wait, why is this even in here? Then you're not using the character well. If you're going to represent women, minorities, people who are gay, whatever, okay? If you're going to be able to represent people well, representation has to be more than just a label. It has to be more than just a character trait that means nothing. Show respect for the characters, show respect for who they are, and if you're going to somehow call out something about their nature that makes them a little different than others, a minority group, then that's fine, but make it relevant to the story. It's kind of like Laura Dern's character in The Last Jedi. There's this whole thing, oh my gosh, she may be the first LGBT character in a Star Wars film. Okay. Does it mean anything? Is it going to actually show up somehow in the film and actually make a difference? And isn't it all based on one quick line where Leia says something about liking humanoid males? And the character says, oh, well, that's so limiting. You know, I mean, that's okay. That's a good human moment. That felt natural to the story. It naturally made sense to find out a little bit about her. Same thing with Sinjir in the Aftermath books. It felt natural. We were going to follow him in his relationship and his connection to Condor Kill. That made sense. We needed to know the character was gay. But try to focus on telling a good story and being true to the characters and giving us characters who we can like and that everyone, not just the mainstream people, not just the majority, but everyone can identify with in some way. But don't shoehorn things in just for the political correctness side, because then you start losing track of the story. Which goes into number 2. Don't do shit just for clickbait. I'm looking at you, Marvel, Sana Solo, the Armored Stormtrooper Group, Task Force, whatever it is, 97 or whatever it is. It seems like Marvel is big on this idea of we're going to do whatever we can to generate clickbait and generate sales by doing stupid crap that somebody sat back and said, ooh, wouldn't this be cool? Sweet! And put together without actually thinking the story relating to it through. Sana Solo, nope, she's Sana Staros. Everybody saw that sort of friggin' a Friends-esque, sitcom-esque twist coming. Task Force 97. Cool to see in action to a degree, but do you not think that somebody was sitting around the room and said, hey, wouldn't this be cool? And everybody else was like, ooh, that'd be cool! And they just threw it into a story that we still haven't seen fully flesh itself out within that series. Stop it with the clickbait. Okay? And at the time, stop it with the frickin' variant covers, too. You should not need 100+ covers for an issue of a Star Wars comic if you are a collector. That's just insane. The books are heading that way, too, at this point. Phasma had a signed exclusive version from Books A Million, had a special exclusive poster version from Barnes & Noble, a special exclusive poster version from Target, and another one from Walmart, plus the regular one. Don't need that many variants, especially on books that cost nearly $30 a pop. So definitely steer, again, with both of those kind of together, steer towards story more than anything else. I guess the other change that I would make is pin down the dates. Way too often now when it comes to the Star Wars comics or the books, we're basically being told general time frames that are very broad, and we're not giving any kind of a pin down dates for stories. So for the comics, it's, well, there's kind of like a present, so like if there's a mini-series that's released around the same time as this arc going on in the main series, they're kind of happening around the same time. Okay, that makes no friggin' sense because of where the characters are. Okay, well then we'll fit it in somewhere around there where there's time for the story. Figure it out first. I'm reminded of when I asked, hey, when does the Lando comic take place? And their answer is, well, it's between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. Awesome. When does the Lando comic take place? 3-year stretch is not specific enough. You've got writers who are going to be tripping over each other's feet because they don't know what order their stories take place in relation to others, and if you're not pinning it down, it's going to cause problems. With different aspects of Luke's training and so forth, that's going to cause problems. That's one of the areas we're seeing it now. With trying to cram a bunch of stuff in after Poe starts going and looking for Lor San Tekka, before the Awakening, trying to cram in a bunch of stuff between that and the beginning of The Force Awakens, it's going to run into problems. Pin stuff down, and don't give us books where the present has flashbacks to the past, but there's either an indeterminate amount of time in between certain parts, so we don't know when the past stuff took place, in the case of Thrawn, or in the case of Phasma, that we know exactly how long before the present the flashbacks take place. We have no idea when the frickin' present is except for a 6-year window. That's asinine. Pin it down. I don't even care if you tell us you've pinned it down, okay? But pin it down. This whole thing about, well, we're just gonna leave it able to move around so that there's plenty of freedom for the authors out there means not only is there freedom for different storytelling, which is great. We can shift things around a little bit to make room for these stories that might take place before it conceptually because we didn't narrow it down to a specific time of year or something. But just as it gives them freedom to create, it's freedom to fuck up. And it's going to happen. So let's make it a little bit more pinned down and a little bit less crazy. That's all I'm asking. Okay, sorry. Got a little carried away there. Dharamveer asks, how much does the new canon staying intact depend on the performance of Disney stock? Are you confident in said stock right now and in the near future, or far future, doing well? Does ESPN's management prove that Disney is willing to put politics ahead of profits, or that criticism is wrong-headed? Let's see. So I haven't really been paying attention to Disney stock, so I can't speak specifically to the Disney stock. I can say that Star Wars and Marvel are such a big part of what Disney's doing now, but it's not the only part, that I don't necessarily see Disney stock dipping enough at any point to have them say, okay, we're done, or we're doing something completely different when it comes to Star Wars. I think it's pretty much a lock at this point, unless Disney actually starts imploding and just starts doing blatant money grabs, or something like that. But I don't see that necessarily happening. As for the whole ESPN thing, I'm assuming he's talking about how ESPN has gotten very political lately, very left-wing political lately, in what a lot of its commentators are saying. And there's this whole thing of, well, does that belong in coverage of sports? And are they putting sort of the profits ahead of, you know, just covering the sports and whatnot, or putting the politics ahead of it in that they're trying to get a certain demographic and sort of be edgy? And this idea that, you know, if you're critical, well, then you're just wrong, right? I would say that that's not something that they probably should be doing unless there is a relevant reason to bring politics into the discussion. I mean, if we're talking about Star Wars and we're talking about a Star Wars book like Aftermath, yes, politics becomes a relevant part of that discussion, sure. But make sure it's on topic, right? Make sure it actually makes sense and it's not just completely out of nowhere. I do think that it'd be better if they were a little more balanced with it, but it just depends on who it is they've got as their host. Do you want to choose them based on the host and what they can do for sports stuff? Or their host and what their political views are? Well, if you're a sports network, it should be the one, not the other, in theory. The idea of any kind of criticism being wrong-headed, that is always something that I would disagree with. Criticism and being able to speak out against something is part of such the American way. I mean, it's enshrined within the First Amendment, freedom of speech and so forth. Freedom of speech, but not freedom of consequence for speech if you upset people, piss off your audience, or perhaps lose your viewers, as the case may be. So, yeah, I mean, I think Disney is in pretty good shape, is going to stay in pretty good shape, and as far as Star Wars is going to be in good shape. But if you start looking at profitability of other parts of Disney, sure, there may be some changes that need to get made, but I don't see them changing the approach to Star Wars all that much. He also asks if the majority of real-life national and regional accents take me out of the Star Wars experience. He says he knows it's had its effect on him, and what accents don't bother me in Star Wars context. What accents are the ones that I know of that kick me out of it? Accents don't really get me in Star Wars. It's the stereotypes. Right? It's like I'm fine with Jar Jar's way of speaking and the accent that he somewhat takes on when he speaks in Gunganese. I'm fine with the way the Nemoidians speak and their accent, if it's just their accent. But it's not. They are caricatures and designed as stereotypically certain ethnic groups in the real world that is, to some degree, insulting. Not just to them, but to the audience in general, because it is so blatant. So in that sense, those type of things kick me out, but it's not because of the accent itself, it's the stereotype that goes along with it. Otherwise, I actually think that the accents are pretty cool. I mean, it's nice to see the diversity as far as that goes. I mean, it makes more sense even in Star Wars than in the real world, right? In the real world, we've got a bunch of states in the United States, some of which have different accents, and different countries in the world, some of which speak with different accents in different regions. Well, Star Wars is a whole galaxy with tons and tons of planets, way more planets than we have countries, and yet people get annoyed sometimes when people are speaking different accents. Wait, what? No, it makes perfect sense that they do. In fact, for me, I think it was really cool hearing, for instance, the accent for Cassian Andor with the Mexican accent, because it felt so different with Star Wars to finally see that represented. If anything, why all the bad guys got to be British? Seriously. Just saying. He also asked, what is your favorite Star Wars knockoff movie and why? And intentional parodies don't count. If intentional parodies don't count, I have no idea because I can't really think of many Star Wars knockoff movies. So, I mean, closest thing I can think of is like the Masters of the Universe movie with Dolph Lundgren that had Star Wars-esque aspects to it that I find pretty fun. But otherwise, really couldn't say. He asked another question here, quite a few questions. This one's a little tough for me to figure out what he's trying to ask. I think I can reword it in a way that fits what he's trying to ask, which is that it's his impression that Disney cares very little about the quality of the current animated series, or the animated series in general, which I guess would be Rebels and Forces of Destiny. And will there be an exception after Rebels, or if Filoni leaves the scene? I don't see them not caring at all. Like, I don't see them as not caring at all. There seems to be a lot of effort and excitement pulled into Rebels. So I think with Rebels, they're doing a bang-up job and are really giving the team the support that they need. That said, Forces of Destiny kind of sucked, right? It's kind of a mess, kind of dull, not a lot going on. Supposed to be sort of a love letter to female fans, but instead, if that's their way of showing that they appreciate female fans with such a meh series, it seems more insulting than it is uplifting to me. But I think that's just the nature of Forces of Destiny. If they're going to be doing a full half-hour series, then they've got some pretty quality stuff with Rebels, and with LEGO Star Wars The Freemaker Adventures as well. Those are also quite good. So I think they do care about the quality of the product. Post-Filoni, I think we'll see a very different approach taken perhaps to Star Wars animation, but what that approach is, couldn't say. Two more questions from Jar Veer, one being, does Hayden Christensen, the human being and the actor, lack the charisma and gravitas to play the legendary Anakin Skywalker, period, no matter who's behind the camera? Ooh. I think part of Hayden Christensen's issue was the dialogue he was given to read, right? I mean, he's arguing with Obi-Wan in the intense battle scene about, Chancellor Palpatine is evil! And it's funny, well, from my point of view, Jedi are evil! What? It just, seriously, this is the end for you, my master. As Harrison Ford said, you can write this shit, but you can't say it. Well, sometimes you can write it, and then you can say it. It's just that when you say it, it doesn't really sound all that great. Some pretty clunky dialogue sometimes in the prequels. Lucas has said many times he's not a dialogue guy. So that said, I think he was better, perhaps, and more human, so to speak, in things like Jumper, which showed a little bit more of his range to some degree. So I think that if he'd had perhaps better direction, perhaps better writing, he would have been a better Anakin. That said, it's going to be difficult for anyone to sort of bridge that gap between badass Darth Vader and cutesy, yippee, wizard, Jake Lloyd Anakin from Episode 1. So I don't know. Could other people have played the role better? Probably. Probably. But was he completely unable to do so because of a lack of charisma and gravitas? Gravitas maybe, because I don't think he built up the gravitas yet at that point. Charisma, though, I'm not sure, because I liked his role in Jumper. I just think he was given some bad writing. Some writing that told a good story, but did it with clunky dialogue. And then final question from Darren Veer before we move on to someone else. Keiko Parasiti had a hard time wielding a lightsaber in the Clone Wars despite being an assassin. How do you feel about anyone being able to wield one in the new canon? Since Clone Wars is canon, is this the first major canon clash in the new Star Wars universe? I'm not sure that's actually much of a clash. I mean, if you're an assassin, you might specialize in, firearms, precision sniper rifles, quiet up-close assassinations with knives, and that sort of thing. Maybe Keiko Parasiti just wasn't really good with the lightsaber yet, hadn't been trained in it, because it's not exactly something that you would necessarily see a non-Jedi using. I do think it's a little bit weird and disjointed that we see people using lightsabers as if it's nothing, whereas in Legends, you had to have that Force connection to do it, or to do it well without the idea of, well, if you don't have the Force, you'll just lop your foot off, and stuff like that. But I think that's more just a departure from the old continuity versus it actually being a clash in the new one. I'm not sure what I think of it so much, because we've seen it so much in Legends, but they are building a new lore around lightsabers and their crystals now, so that it actually, you take something like a Sabine Wren in Rebels, and the way that Kanan talks her through how she has to essentially get connected with the saber, even if she doesn't have the Force as a Jedi, to be able to wield the dark saber effectively. I think that kind of thing makes sense, that someone would need that to be good with it, but to be able to just use it at all, you should be able to pick it up like a flashlight and just slash something like Han did slashing open the Tauntaun, right? Because it is a tool, an implement, not a living thing. Let's see. All right, moving on to other questions here. We have Joshua Breen, who asks, do you think George Lucas gets too much credit for quote-unquote creating Star Wars? No, I mean, he created Star Wars, so he should definitely get the credit for being the creator of Star Wars. Without his original ideas, the universe that he created, the universe that he continued to shape even through the Clone Wars, for better or worse in some cases, Star Wars exists because of him. As do so many other things in filmmaking, because of him and the direction he drove his companies in, like ILM. I think he really was a film visionary. That said, to say that Star Wars is all the creation of George Lucas entirely wouldn't be valid either, because there have been people who expanded upon his vision, whether we're talking about on TV with Dave Filoni and such with Rebels, whether we're talking about books and comics now and in the past, video games, whether it's LucasArts or some kind of licensee, the new films coming out without Lucas's involvement. Star Wars is much bigger than Lucas now. That doesn't mean he shouldn't be getting credit for creating Star Wars. He did. Then second to last question overall here from Thomas Anthony Smith, who says, thanks for answering his question in the previous video, and then asks, I just want to know if you would ever think of carrying on doing your Star Wars canon library at some point in the future, or a tour of the books and comics that you own so far. Just talking about a series that I did for a while called From the Star Wars Library, which looked at Star Wars releases in publication order. Good news with that. When the Patreon launches in October, there will be a goal of X amount of donation per month. That if we hit that goal, I will be bringing back From the Star Wars Library with at least one new episode per month. Now, how I'm going to do that, I'm not quite sure yet. Probably starting back where I left off. But there may be a separate little side series with it, which is sort of From the Star Wars Canon Library. I may have to split it from the Star Wars Legends Library and then from the Star Wars Canon Library. Because the Legends side has a lot of a historical look back, because we now know the context and the ramifications of many of these publications. Whereas now, we don't really know the impact of a lot of stuff as we're reading. I mean, who knows if anything in the Phasma novel will have an impact on anything at this point? We don't know. It's a journey to the Last Jedi, but I can't imagine there's a lot of Last Jedi-related stuff in that book, having read it. If you haven't read it, spoiler alert, Lord Lefrise meets Mad Max, more or less. So, I don't know. You know, I mean, it'll be coming back probably, because I'm hoping we'll be able to hit that goal. Right now, what I'm looking at is probably a $500 a month goal, which would assume that at least 100 people from the 3,500 who follow this YouTube channel or podcast or wherever, at least 100 of those people were to sign up for at least the $5 a month tier, which is the one that gets you the audio commentaries that I'm creating for Clone Wars and will eventually do for Rebels, the Ewok stuff, and everything else. If we hit that level, then yeah, it'll be coming back. As for a tour of the books I own so far, I don't think a tour would be all that interesting, really. I mean, it's bookshelves, stacks and stacks of stuff. Not really all that organized anymore, because I ran to the point where I was running out of space. So I had to take them and start putting on the side and basically just cramming in as many as I could per block on the shelves, rather than having them all still standing up in chronological order like they used to be. Legends over here still, Story Group Canon over there. Though Story Group Canon is probably going to get lighter, because I'm going to start probably saying screw it to picking up variants, because it's just getting insane, as I mentioned earlier. Let's see. And then we have a question from Matthew Murdoch. I see what you did there, my friend. Or I perhaps hear and sense what you did there, as opposed to seeing what you did there. See? Daredevil references. Questions asked are there different levels of canon for the new stuff? I noticed the Del Rey timeline doesn't include Lost Stars or Ahsoka. Could you give your quick thoughts on the novelizations for the prequels, 7, and Rogue One? What was in your Star Wars home video collection before you started collecting for the series? Are there any continuity errors in the new canon yet? Do you have any collections other than the books and home video releases, Star Wars or otherwise? And if you were to make a Star Wars movie, what would it be about? Well, that's a lot of questions. Let me see if I can hit these kind of all in one big batch. So, are there different levels of canon for the new stuff? So far, technically no. Technically everything, all the stories you see in the films and on Rebels and in Forces of Destiny and the stuff you get from the books and the comics and such are all one level of canon. One continuity, all of equal validity. But there's also the asterisk there, which is, yeah, but see, when the novelizations come around or comic adaptations come around, they may differ a little bit from what you see in the film, so the film takes precedence over the adaptation, which is always a big duh, but in a sense, that's creating a new sub-level. It's not a big sub-level, it's kind of fine print underneath everything else, but in a sense, there's that kind of level going on. But I imagine at some point we are going to see direct clashes between something that's made as a standalone story and what we see in a film because of production difference times. And we're going to wind up seeing at some point them having to delineate something. But so far they haven't delineated except in the case of novelizations. As for why the Del Rey timeline doesn't include Lost Stars or Ahsoka, easy. Lost Stars and Ahsoka aren't Del Rey books. The Del Rey timeline in the front of the books only show the Del Rey published Star Wars books of the new canon. So if you want to see Lost Stars, Ahsoka, Weapon of a Jedi, Smuggler's Run, all that kind of stuff, those are from Disney Lucasfilm Press. They won't show up on Del Rey's timeline any more than the Marvel Comics will. Different publisher, only promoting their own stuff. Quick thoughts on the novelization of the prequels 7 and Rogue One. I thought the novelization of Rogue One was pretty good. Didn't add a lot to the experience, except for understanding Jyn a bit more. So in that sense, recommended. Episode 7 novelization added less, but it was all right, though I wonder about some of the things that may have added to our understanding, but probably were removed from the film or removed from the script on purpose, so may not be valid anymore, such as the whole, as soon as Rey gets the lightsaber grabbed through the Force, in the novelization, there's the, it is you realization from Kylo Ren that's not in the film. So who knows if him recognizing her is even remotely going to be considered part of canon anymore, or if it ever was. Prequels, Episode 1 and 2 added a little bit. I enjoyed them. Episode 2 actually helped us pin down the timing of when Episode 1 took place because you got flashbacks to a month before Episode 2 where there's the celebration of Anakin's birthday and everything, and the fact that Anakin must have had his birthday right around the time of the Phantom Menace because otherwise he can't be 9 in Phantom Menace and 10 years later be 20 in Attack of the Clones because that's 11 years, not 10. So it has to have been a similar birthday time. I use the novelization of Revenge of the Sith as the basis of what I call the Stover effect. So it's a huge impact on me, and I use that term a lot within the podcast that I do, of the Stover effect, which is the idea of reading a novelization or reading a novel based on a film or an adaptation of a film that adds so much to your understanding of enjoyment of the film that is a fundamentally different experience having read the adaptation than it would have been otherwise. I have much greater appreciation for Revenge of the Sith, and for a while it was my favorite Star Wars film, less because of what I saw on screen and more because of the nuance that was given to it because of Stover's novelization. It is fantastic. Let's see. What was in my home video collection before I started collecting for the series? Few things, usually like one version of different films, so let me look over here and answer for you. We had the Blu-ray Complete Saga set for 2011, but not the individual trilogy releases. We had the 2004 and 2006 original trilogy DVDs, but not the ones from 2005 or 2008. I had the special edition full screen and widescreen VHS sets from 97, but not from 2000. The full screen and widescreen sets from 1992, but not the full screen set from 1990. None of the releases prior to that. I had the Ewok and Droids cartoon spliced together film versions on VHS and DVD, and the Ewok telemovies on VHS and DVD. I didn't have any of the earlier Ewok releases. I had no Laserdiscs whatsoever. Had the CEDs of the trilogy, but not of the making of special. No VHDs. No PVDs at that point, but I did have Story of Star Wars, the DVD from 2005. Various parodies. The Clone Wars, I had the Clone Wars micro series on DVD and the Clone Wars later series on Blu-ray, but not DVD. And then the other stuff didn't come until later. So stuff like that. My thing was basically I wanted to have everything, but I cared about having it in the best way rather than every way. And then if I bought something that was in my collection and I then replaced it by something that was a newer version, you know, DVD replacing VHS, Blu-ray replacing DVD, whatever, I didn't get rid of the old stuff. Are there any continuity errors in the new canon yet? Yeah, I mean, there are small ones that happen that cause issues. It's more, I'll put it this way, it's less a bunch of continuity errors as continuity uncertainties. Like, there are things that could be errors depending on, for instance, the order in which you assume that certain events take place in different stories between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. But they haven't pinned them down to tell us what order they're supposed to go in. So are they errors or are they not? Depends on what order they wind up in when they finally pin the damn things down. But not a lot of those. Just clashes mainly within the novelizations or adaptations and the films themselves, for the most part. None are springing to mind now as major new issues. Let's see. Do you have any Star Wars collections other than the books or home video releases, and Star Wars or otherwise? Star Wars, I mean, I collect some of the gaming stuff. Like, I've got all the LCG stuff, all the Imperial Assault stuff, X-Wing stuff, Armada stuff, Rebellion stuff, the different Fantasy Flight Games things. Not the RPG stuff. I get those, I review them, and then a buddy of mine splits the cost with me, so then I give them to him, and they go in his collection. Play a lot of Star Wars video games, but I wouldn't call any of them collections or anything like that. That's mainly it as far as Star Wars stuff is concerned. My wife, as you may be able to see up above on the little edge of the screen, collects Kylo Ren and Yoda stuff, so she's got tons of that stuff up there, but that's all predominantly her stuff, and she collects the Star Wars Build-A-Bear bears now. So thankfully I know what I can always get for, you know, Valentine's Day, her birthday, Christmas, whatever. Build-A-Bear Star Wars, so please keep them coming, Build-A-Bear Workshop. Other stuff, geez. So, I mean, there's digital comics that I don't collect so much as I read a bunch of. I did for years collect J. Michael Straczynski's Rising Stars comics. You could sort of call them collections. Like, I get all the Blu-rays I can and Blu-ray 3D discs and whatnot of things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff, but I'm not sure I'd call that a collection. Same thing with, like, I play all the Ascension games and the Marvel Legendary games and the DC deck building games. And for the DC deck building game, I've tried to collect all the different promo cards. Is that collecting? Kind of, but I wouldn't really call it a collection. You know what I mean? Let's see. If you're making a Star Wars movie, what would it be about? Wow. Depends on what continuity it'd be set in. You know, if it'd be set in the Legends continuity, then I'd be doing something very, very late in the game to give us a real wrap-up for a lot of the stories that were left hanging at the end of Crucible, before Legacy. If it was something that was in the new canon, I wanted to do something kind of different that still feels Star Wars-y. I'm not sure I'd want to do something with the main characters. Probably do something a little more like Rogue One, stuff that's kind of an off-to-the-side type story, but with original characters whose fates aren't known, so I can do whatever I want with them, and yet still have them interact with the galactic events. Something like that, you know, or maybe take some of the storylines that we see in other media and expand upon them, like something from Rebels and expand upon it, like do an animated feature, perhaps, with Dave Filoni. That would be, because they said they're not going to do it in Season 4 of Rebels, even though the Ghost and such appeared in Rogue One, have a special Rebels animated feature that is the real end cap of Rebels after Season 4 that actually shows their role in and just after Rogue One and the Battle of Yavin. Something like that. But I don't know. I mean, just something interesting. Something that intrigues me. And then they can be put out in a bajillion different types of home video release, so I can also cover it in the book and on the YouTube channel. Mwahahaha. Yeah, that there is something dark side, let me tell you. And I think that actually is all of the questions we had this time around. Woo! And literally, this is the hottest room in my house, and when I'm doing these videos, I have to have the window that usually has a heavy light blocking curtain over it, not only with the curtain pulled over, but the blinds opened, and I can't use my little light on my desk. I have to actually use the light from the pair of computers next to me, or the pair of computer monitors next to me, and the actual light from the ceiling that is almost never on otherwise, because it gets so damn hot in here. So, whoo! After recording this, the Patreon message, the stuff for fanboys and Family Guy from the Star Wars Home Video Library, I am pooped. I'm about to collapse. But, as before, if you want to ask more questions, and you could just wait for the Patreon thing in October, become a Patreon with a $10 or more level of monthly donation or whatever you want to call it, and take part in those exclusive Patreon member-only ones. Or just post questions in the comments below this video. I will try not to answer them in the comments, and then when I do another of these for the vlog, I will circle back and grab questions from the comments to use as the questions for the next Your Questions Answered episode, just like I did this time. With that, thank you all for your questions. I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been enjoyable, entertaining, maybe enlightening, or at least not boring. Catch you next time on The Voice of Reason or Lack Thereof. Thanks for watching.